Good morning, students. Welcome to the lecture on the graphic novel that we have in our syllabus titled as Mouse. Mouse is a very famous graphic novel written by Art Spiegelman, and it is considered to be one of the most important and one of the most trend-setting graphic novels of the modern era. Now, before we go on to talk about Mouse and we talk about what exactly is happening in the text, we first need to know what is a graphic novel and how to read a graphic novel, because a graphic novel has a separate language of its own. So we need to understand the technical elements that are associated with the graphic novel. So our first lecture is going to be introducing you to the genre of graphic novel, introducing you to the language of graphic novel so that you can go ahead and read the text. Okay. So to begin with, what is a graphic novel? A graphic novel is very similar to a comic. So just like a comic, it is also a book-length illustration, a story that is told through illustrations. Sometimes it tells a single story, sometimes it tells a continuous narrative from the first page to the last page. And sometimes they are collections of shorter stories or individual comic strips. So in terms of how they look like, there's not much of a difference between a graphic novel and a comic strip. So when you take up a book, it looks exactly like a comic strip. And you have to understand that this is a graphic novel based on other elements that are there. Okay, so though they look similar and the pattern is similar and the techniques that are used in drawing graphic novels and illustrating graphic novels are similar, there are very clear differences between graphic novels and traditional comics. One important difference is in terms of their length. Graphic novels are much longer and they are very, very complex. The other important difference is that comic books will tell the story over many issues. So you have a comic book, for example, the Marvel series. There will be a series of books written on those comic characters, and you will have a whole set of comic books on those particular characters. Whereas graphic novels, just like literary novels, will have their storylines wrapped up in one or maybe two books. Sometimes graphic novels move on to two volumes. Mouse also is spread across two volumes. In our syllabus, we are dealing with only one volume. Okay, so there are some distinct differences between graphic novels and comics. Let us look at some of the differences. First one is, as I told you, graphic novels are much longer, whereas comic books tell the story over many serialized stories. So while comic books will have several, sections or serials of the same story or the same characters encountering different things in the story, graphic novel is only one story, but it's a long story. Okay. Second thing is definitely something that sets a graphic novel apart from a comic book, and that is in terms of their complexity. Graphic novels deal with complex themes, complex elements, and it deals with a complex story. Whereas comics books, as you know, are all about, the themes and the target audience of comic books are mostly the young, the children, right? We see in graphic novels, we have the storylines are wrapped up in one or two books. So it's like a complete book when you take up a graphic novel, whereas in comics, we have the story spread out through several books over a long period of time. Okay, stories can unfold over months and years, sometimes years in comic books. All right, we see in graphic novels there are much more conscious elements of style. The graphic novel writers incorporate a lot of graphic styles consciously that are more sophisticated, that are more detailed, and that are more metaphorically loaded. Okay, we see that comic books, on the other hand, are quite simplistic in their narratives and they are straightforward in their narratives. Okay, interestingly enough, though we think that graphic novels are something of a modern age, whereas comic books have been there for for a longer time. Actually, what we see is that the graphic novels actually predate comic books. So they came before the comic books came in. All right. And as a reputation, they have a reputation of being gritty, explicit, and for mature audiences, as I just mentioned here. Comics books, on the other hand, are relegated to a more popular mainstream audience in terms of their content, in terms of their reach, and most of them, they have carried the stamp of being children's literature or children's books rather than having anything of adult interest. Okay, so these are the difference that we can see in terms of their length, in terms of their publication, in terms of their content, in terms of their form, and we can say that graphic novels and comics are distinctly different genres and they cannot be mixed together, though on the surface, as I told you, in terms of how they appear, they look very similar. Okay, all right. Now there are several graphic novels that are written in different languages, in different literary cultures, and they are very popular in the modern day era. Especially, we see that graphic novels have almost been elevated to the status of serious literature. There are some important graphic novels that you can read or you can look at. Mouse definitely is one of the most important ones in the list. It deals with a very serious theme and it deals with a tragic theme, and that is of the Holocaust, the killing of the Jews during the Second World War. We will be coming to that in detail when we do the text. But apart from the theme of Holocaust, we have several other graphic novels handling other serious themes. For example, you have Gabriel Bell's Voyeurs, which deals with the problems of the modern living, the modern life, and it is a very complex book. Then you have Satrapi's Persepolis, again a very famous graphic novel that deals with the life of women under the Iranian regime. Okay, so it's a feminist book that deals with the life of women and how their freedom has been curtailed under the religious regime that is ruling in Iran. Okay. All right. Then you have the Burma Chronicles. This is a graphic novel written by a Canadian journalist, Guy Delisle. And here we get to see about his exploits in a foreign land and, how he feels as an alien foreigner in that land of Burma. Okay. So then you have Delhi Calm. These three in the bottom row are graphic novels from India, very famous, and they have been quite popular among the Indian audiences. You have Delhi Calm by Bishwajyoti Ghosh, which deals with the emergency that was imposed by Indira Gandhi. Okay. Then you have Kari by Amruta Patil, very important book. It's a feminist book, deals with lesbian issues in India. Then you have Munnu, a Boy from Kashmir by Malik Sajjad, which is a book based on the situation of the Kashmir. So if you can look at the, these list of books, you will see what essentially a graphic novel is. Of course, there will be graphic illustrations. The whole story will be told through graphic illustrations. But at the same time, these are novels that conclude the story within one book. So they are, the story is complete within the covers. There are no serialized volumes that come out with these stories. Okay, and what we also get to see here is that the content of the stories or the themes of the stories are extremely serious. They are not just for the children. They are definitely not for the children. They deal with political issues. They deal with social issues. They deal with complex issues of identity, of modernity. So we see that the graphic novels are very similar to literature in the literary mode. What we read in text in the written form is something very similar to a graphic novel, though they seem like they are very easy to read, or they are very simplistic to look at because they consist of images, but that's not the case. Okay, all right. Reading a graphic novel, again, while you are reading a graphic novel, you have to be a different reader than when you are reading a comic book. right? So in terms of reading, what is the difference between a graphic novel and a comic book? The tone of the comic book is usually suspenseful and exciting, and it appeals to a younger audience. And as I told you, that comics are usually short works told in serial form. A graphic novel needs a lot of serious reflection. When you read a graphic novel, you need to read it, you need to understand the nuances, you need to understand the sophisticated visuals that have been included, and you need to understand the complexity of the stories. Okay. However, in terms of reading, they can be read in the same way. The story is told across the panels, so you have to move from one panel to another, and you have to take a note of both the graphics as well as the text. Okay. All the graphic novels, just like a normal book, would read from left to right. So you begin from the left hand side and you move on to the right hand side, just like a normal book. There is only one exception to this format, and that is the Japanese manga. Okay, a Japanese manga is something where you read in the reverse order, just like an Urdu book. But apart from this, the rest of the books have to be read from the beginning to the end, from the left to the right. Okay, let us now talk about the layout and the design of a graphic novel page. So these are the technical terms that you need to consider. There are borders, gutters, open panels, panels, and splash panels. Let us see what each of these are. This is called as a border. Okay, it's very simple to understand. So borders are nothing but the borders that are there at the page. As you can see, in this particular page, the border is black. Okay, so that's a very simple concept to understand. All right. Going on to more elements of layout, we have gutters. Now, what do we mean by gutters? Gutters are the spaces between the panels in the comic. Now, these are known as panels. These boxes that you can see here, just follow my cursor. These boxes are known as individual panels, and the spaces in between the boxes are known as gutters. All right. In this particular page, we see that the gutters are white. The space of the gutters is also modulated by the graphic artist. We'll come to it later on when we do the text, how these elements are used to convey a message, and they're used to convey certain meanings in the story. But for now, we'll just deal with the meaning of the technical terms. Okay. Now the next one is known as open panels or borderless panels. In this particular example, as you can see, that there are no borders, right? This particular panel does not have a border, and this is usually used to kind of show a dramatic effect. So this panel, as you can see, has no borders, and it is known as a borderless panel or an open panel. All right. This should have actually come before the rest of the things, but anyway, these are known as panels. These are the rectangles or squares where the action of the comic is drawn. As you can see, we can see different sizes for the panels depending on what action we are seeing. So we can see the short panels. We have, the first one that we see here is a borderless panel, as you can see. Then you have a panel with a blue border, and then you have a rectangular panel which is much longer in terms of its display. All right, so this particular page has three defined and different types of panels, as you can see. Another kind of panel that we can come across in a graphic novel or a comic is a splash panel. This is a panel that actually takes up the space of several panels in the comic in order to introduce or highlight an action or character. Okay, as you can see that this is a splash panel. Several panels have been merged together to create this scene of multiple characters and multiple actions taking place simultaneously. All right, okay. Now we move on to another set of technical terms known as angles. In angles, we have bleed, close-up, extreme close-up, long shot, extreme long shot, and reverse. These terms are very similar to the technical terms that we use to talk about films, because when you look at them, you will see that they're exactly the same techniques that are used in another kind of a visual text, and that is a film. All right. What is a bleed? A bleed is an image that runs outside the border of the panel. So this is the panel, as you can see, and the borders are defined here, and the image of this spider woman, her legs and her hands seem to bleed out of panel. They're not contained within the panel. It seems that there's something beyond the panel, beyond the borders of the panel. Can you see here? Yeah, so this is known as bleed. There are different other kinds of bleeds as well. For example, there are spillings where the figure's hands might be outside the border as well. Here it is part of the panel, but then it gives a semblance of something beyond this panel, right? So this is an example of bleed. All right. We also have something called a full bleed, which means that an image that runs outside the panel on all four sides. So in this particular panel, you will see that several images are running out of the borders, right? So you have this hand and the cape of this character, and then you have the cape of this monster. All of it are bleeding out in all different sizes out of the panel, and that is why it is known as a full bleed. Okay, usually you will see this kind of an image on the covers of the comic book for creating an effect. All right, now coming to, as I told you, more technical film related terms, we have a close-up where the images are shown in a larger view. Frequently close-ups focus on a character's face, but they can be used to highlight anything. In this particular example that we see, the close-up is used to focus on Spider-Man's eyepiece and the reflection that is there. Can you see here the bird image that we see in Spider-Man's eyes? All right, so that is why the close-up has been used, much like in a film technique. All right, then you also have extreme close-up. These two are examples of extreme close-ups. These are images that are shown in very large view, often focusing on a large portion of a larger object or character. So it's almost like the artist kind of zoomed in very closely on the object or the character to reveal certain details about the object or the character. Okay, so these are examples of extreme close-up. As I told you, you can see these techniques in films as well. You can see close-up and extreme close-up in films as well, whereby certain things are emphasized through these techniques. Okay, opposite to the close-up shot, we have the long shot, where the camera kind of moves back to capture the entire scene. So we see that the objects can be seen fully from the top to bottom, and when a long shot focuses on characters, the panel shows the characters from head to toe, and readers can see the characters' full body through a long shot panel. All right, just like a close-up and an extreme close-up, you also have a long shot and an extreme long shot. This is an extreme long shot. It's almost like, again, try to see it from the perspective of a camera's view, and you will see that if the camera moves back and captures a larger scene, that's where a long shot will come. So images that show objects or characters in very small scale, you can see here, and frequently extreme long shots are used to show a full landscape or a crowd of characters, as you can see here. Okay, so full landscape or a crowd of characters, the whole idea is to capture the entire scene and not just one particular element of the scene. Okay. Now we also have another technique known as the reverse, and in this technique the images are in reverse position from the previous panel, and this technique is often used to show changes in speaker or point of view positions. Okay, so you can see these two examples. You can see that here this character is on top, and then on the right bottom we have the emergence of this character, and immediately after that in the next panel there has been a reversal in which the character's speech bubbles are also changing, as well as the position of the character. So this is known as a reverse. All right, now moving on from the visual elements of a graphic novel, let us go on to talk about the technicalities of text containers. And as I told you that in a graphic novel or in a comic, along with the visuals, the text is also very important, and there are several techniques that are used to depict the text narration. So under this category, we are going to look at balloons, which are both speech and thought. We are also going to look at captions, narrative box, and sound effect. Okay, let's see. Now, balloons, I think most of you are familiar with speech balloons and thought balloons. In speech balloons, objects that are used to contain the dialogue that the characters in the comic speak. So when you depict, somebody speaking something, you use a speech balloon, all right, like this. We know that this character is talking, and how do we know? We look at this, and this is a speech balloon, as you can point out. Okay, so there is this sharp edge that goes into towards the mouth of the character, and then they have balloons, which shows that this is a speech balloon. All right. Thought balloons are similar to speech balloons, but they look a little different. This is how a thought balloon looks like. There will be they look like bubbles, which means that this is what the character is thinking. He or she is not speaking out loudly, but he is only thinking about things. Okay, so this is a thought balloon. Can you see here? I'm moving the cursor on the thought balloons for you to see. You can see that these are thought balloons. The whole page is full of thought balloons, and somewhere here we have speech balloons. So this is what the character is speaking. This is what the character is thinking. Okay. All right. The difference between the speech balloon and the thought balloons is very simple. Speech balloons contain dialogues that the characters speak in the novel, whereas thought balloons contain the character's thoughts. And balloons are frequently rounded but can take many shapes, including rectangular. It doesn't mean that it needs to look only oval or rounded. It can be rectangular speech balloons as well. And speech balloons typically have smooth edges, but they can also have jagged or irregular edges. Okay. At the same time, thought balloons in these text containers are sometimes called thought bubbles, because the trail of little bubbles that connect to the thought balloon to the character in the comic. So they're not always called as thought balloons, rather they are like bubbles. As you can see, it's almost like, the bubbles are connecting the character to the thought. Okay, so this is a speech balloon, this is a thought bubble or a thought balloon. All right. Along with these techniques, we also have the text inserted in terms of captions. Now, captions are text that speaks directly to the reader, and usually the text will appear below the comic panel, but it can also be placed in or beside or above it as well. All right. So after many years of marital bliss, tension enters the Kent household. So this is a message that is given directly to the readers through a caption of this particular panel. Okay. All right. Then you also have narrative boxes, which is a technique in which rectangles or squares in which a narrator or a character from the story shares special information with readers. Okay. And the box usually narrates something that is happening in the scene or that happened before the scene in the panel. So in this particular example, we see that all the characters are introduced. Okay. And we are told about each character through these narrative boxes. So Anole is somebody who's telegenic. It'll give him something lucrative to fall back on. Then you have Nightcrawler, whose skill is teleportation, everybody's favorite guidance counselor. So information about the characters are given in this narrative boxes. Some special information is shared with the readers. This is not something which the characters are speaking or thinking. This is the narrator relating information to the reader, and that is why they are known as narrative boxes. Okay. Now, along with these texts, we also have another kind of text appearing in a comic book or a graphic novel, and that is that of sound effect. Okay, so different kinds of sound effect are often incorporated in a graphic novel or in a text, and there are certain words that will indicate the sound, and broom and fish and bamf and blam and crack, room, smash. These are sound effects that are incorporated through words in the comics. And for many children, this form a very, very interesting kind of a read. The sound effects create that suspense and create that effect. All right. Okay. Who are the people who are associated in the production of a comic book or a graphic novel? We have the writer, you have the artist. Sorry for the interruption. Okay, so you have these different people who are part of the graphic novel or the comic book production. You have definitely the writer who writes the script from which the story will emerge. Then you have the artist, the person who draws the script, usually using pencils. Then once the drawing is done, you have the inker who goes over the artist's pencil lines with ink to make them stand out. Apart from that, you have the colorist who will put in colors. Nowadays, it's done through software, but earlier it was done by hand, but sometimes using software as well. Then you have the letterer, the person who puts the words in the right places and makes them clearly legible. The letterer might also put in the sound effects as well. And finally, once it is all ready, we have the editor who looks over the stories for errors and fixes any punctuational or other grammatical errors or any kind of errors, as well as he or she helps the creative team find direction for telling the stories. And finally, once the final product is ready, you have the editor-in-chief who's almost, the final surveyor of the whole thing. He's a boss, he's a person all of the above must make happy. Okay, so once he okays the story, then it is ready for production. So these are the different terms that we need to know in terms of graphic novels. And once we start the text, I'm going to take you through the text. And once we read the text, we will understand how these different techniques are working in terms of creating meaning for the readers. Okay. Okay, now we move on to the next lecture on the text.